the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me. Beat my sword.
Those of you who read The Messenger, the Church of the Brethren publication, probably know that the editor writes an editorial at the end of every issue. However, you may not have noticed that the publisher writes a commentary at the beginning of every issue. We had a rare opportunity to visit the general offices of the Church of the Brethren in Elgin, Illinois, where I had never been before. During our visit, we were able to talk to Wendy McFadden, the publisher of Messenger. Wendy, welcome to Brethren Voices.
Thank you.
It's very nice to be with you and get to visit the general offices, which I've never been to before. So
Well, welcome. Glad to have you here.
We're excited about being here too. What struck me is that you have a number of roles at general office, and one of them is the publisher of the Messenger. And you're also involved in the steering committee of the Christian Churches Together. So I'd like to talk about those things and then about the article that you wrote in the recent Messenger. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. Did you grow up Brethren? Where were you born? How did you get here?
I did not grow up Brethren, and so in a sense I'm still a newcomer. I've been Brethren for about 30 years.
In the Brethren Church, that's a newcomer.
Yeah, it is a newcomer. I grew up Presbyterian, actually. I was raised mostly in California and also in Maryland. I was born in South Korea and adopted when I was 1. So grew up in the Bay Area of California and then moved when I was 15 to Maryland. And I met the Brethren by happening to choose one of the Brethren colleges. I'd never heard of the Church of the Brethren before that, just happened to go there, and that's where I became acquainted with the Church of the Brethren. I went to Juniata College in Pennsylvania.
How in the world did you pick Juniata?
Well, I took a year off after high school and worked in Washington, D.C., and then I decided to not apply to any of the schools that I applied to as a senior. I went back to my guidance counselor at the high school and said I was going to start over looking at places, and she said, yesterday we had a representative from Juniata College in, here's the brochure. And I went home with the brochure. I applied, I never visited, I just showed up on the first day of
You
school.
are a brave soul. You are.
Back then we didn't go around visiting colleges the way people do nowadays. You just sign up and you go. But it was within, I think it was about 3.5 hours from where I lived. It seemed like just the right distance. It was, I lived in Maryland, it was in Pennsylvania, and it seemed like a good place to go. So
Far enough away, but not
exactly,
too far.
that's exactly what I was looking for.
And what was your major?
It was called communications. At Juniata, you can write your own major. It's called a program of emphasis. And so I was able to take anything I wanted and figure out how to put it together into a program that I called communications. And my advisors approved that. So that's what I came out with.
Wonderful. So you have a bachelor's in communications?
Yes.
Oh. And then, so by going to Juniata College, you learned about the Church of the Brethren? And
I did. I actually visited a lot of Brethren congregations because I was in what was called the Deputation Club. I think it's still there, and you go around to churches and lead worship services. So I was in many congregations in Pennsylvania, and even I think some outside Pennsylvania, and got a really good taste of who the Brethren are. And my main impression of the Brethren out of that experience was that these are people who live the same all through the week as what they say on Sunday.
I hope that's true. I think for many
That was the
of it-
impression I got from people who weren't even trying to say that.
Oh. Well, I don't think the Brethren would say that, you know, but they would just try to do their
Yeah,
best. So.
yeah.
And then, what happened after college?
Well, I had learned about Brethren volunteer service when I was at Juniata, because every year the representative from BVS would come and set up a table at the college and work at recruiting people to go into BVS. So I had become acquainted with it and thought that was a really good thing to do after college. So I applied and was planning to go into the fall unit after I graduated. I had a job for the summer in New York, and was planning to go from that into BVS, and that's what I did. And the assignment was with Messenger. And after a few weeks, I was hired, so I never really completed my year of volunteer service. I had good intentions, but they needed a managing editor at the time, and I stayed. I've had a number of different jobs since then. I'm currently the publisher of Brethren Press and Communications, which includes Messenger. So I've had enough changes that the job has always been new, but I've been here for 30 years.
At the general office as an employee?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's it like to be a publisher? And it sounds like you do more than just the Messenger, as you
Yes.
just said. So what kinds of things are involved?
Well, the job has changed. Every few years it's a little bit different, and right now what I'm in charge of is the publishing house, which includes one of the biggest things we do is Sunday school curriculum. So the Gather Round project for Sunday school for children and youth takes up some of my time, and the Jubilee curriculum before that, and a number of other curricula projects. Books, study resources, all of those things, hymnals, worship resources, those come out of the publishing house. And then out of the communication side, there's Messenger, of course, also the website, the Newsline, which is our newsletter, or news service that goes out by email and is also on the website. Donor communications, which is regular communication with people to tell stories about donors. And what we call interpretation, so the annual reports. Right now I'm working on the exhibit at annual conference, and a live report in front of the delegates, and other resources like that that help tell the story of what the Church of the Brethren is doing, both in the United States and all around the world.
I think Jim Lehman, who has been on our program, published a book. And was it published by Brethren Press?
Yes. Was it The Old Brethren?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun to work on.
Okay.
It really is fun. You asked what publishers do. I think it's a lot of fun. When you're in a small publishing house, you do lots of different things because there aren't different departments. It's a small group, we all do everything. And so we have a chance to work on books one day, and curriculum another day, and something else on another day. So it's always new.
When in our church bulletin, we get a blank, but it has a cover. It has a picture on the cover. Does that come from?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
In fact, that is probably the publication that reaches the most brethren on a regular basis, because if you think about it, if it's going to, let's say, 100 people in one congregation and multiply that by a number of churches, then that's quite a few people reading that. There's a resource written on the back which a congregation can choose to have, and that tells something about the brethren. It either tells a little story, or it's a reflection piece, or it might be a worship resource, but they're written by brethren. So that gives something for the worshiper to look at and reflect on as they're sitting there during worship. And the photos are chosen by a group of us here with Brethren Press that gets together once a year for a photo selection process.
That was going to be my next question. So you have something to say about selecting the photos, and you do that a year at a time?
We do.
And
yeah.
then the reflection on the back, is that different every week?
Yes, and
And
those
you
are
pick those
those
two?
are done 1 quarter at a time. So a quarter of them get printed all at once, and those resources on the back are sent into our printer. We work with a company called Anchor Wallace that produces the bulletins for us, but they come and meet with us, and we choose the photos and then send in the reflections for the back. So it's prepared for and written by and used by brethren.
Well, let me move to this current issue of the Messenger. This is May 2012. And you have an article in here about a journey that you made, and it's called
Sankofa.
Sankofa. And have you written articles for the Messenger before?
I have, but I usually am more behind the scenes. I don't very often write articles, especially feature stories, but occasionally I do. And in this case, Randy Miller, the editor, asked if I would write about this experience for this issue of the magazine.
I think many of our listeners may have read the article, but there will be many who haven't. So could you talk to us a little bit about the Sankofa and how you discovered it and then what it's about?
Well, Sankofa, first of all, is a West African word that means roughly looking backward to move forward. And the image is of a bird that is flying but looking backwards. And sometimes the image, it's an old symbol, has the bird is carrying an egg, which represents what's coming up. That name was chosen by a program of the Evangelical Covenant Church, which happens to be headquartered just 30 minutes east of here, near the airport.
When I read the article, I couldn't figure out where it was because you didn't say.
Well, they're roughly the same size as the Church of the Brethren, and their headquarters happen to be fairly close. And
so it's a national denomination?
It is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are some similarities with the Church of the Brethren. You know, the Church of the Brethren has strongly Germanic roots and has tried to become more inclusive, and they are more. They have Swedish roots, so they've gone through that same journey of broadening beyond their immigrant heritage. Anyway, I'd heard about this experience that they have, and I heard about it from their former general secretary when I was in a meeting. I think it was about 4 years ago. And they described a commitment as a denomination to becoming more multicultural. And in their effort to do that, they decided to put their leaders on a bus, pairing African American people with people who were not African American. And they spent several days, I think it was virtually a long weekend, at least that's the experience I had, touring civil rights locations across the South and simply experiencing that together. When I heard about that, it really stayed with me because I had been, as many people have, to workshops and other programs to try to work at anti-racism training or learning about white privilege. And the ones that I'd been in hadn't been particularly successful. I didn't think that we'd moved forward in our understanding, and in fact, in some cases, there was probably more, I guess you could say more damage done, more lack of understanding. Emotions went high, and there was less understanding than you could wish for. And what I liked about the idea of the Sankofa Journey is that you don't learn because somebody is talking at you and trying to tell you something. You experience it together, and you experience it differently, I was assuming, if you're traveling with somebody that you have to do that together with. So the way it works, well, when I first heard about it, I thought I want to do that someday. And I had the opportunity this past February. And the way it works is that you spend all your time with this person. You sit in pairs on the bus. You're told that you should, when you get off at a rest stop, and you're stretching your legs, you chat with your partner. You don't divide up and hang out with your friends who might have come with you. You walk through the museums together, and you have this experience together. The time on the bus was not just traveling time, but it was spent watching videos, engaging in conversation, guided conversation. We were asked questions that we were supposed to then discuss with our partner. Periodically, the leaders would invite people to share, and then they would go up to the front of the bus and take the mic and reflect on what they had been talking about with their partner. It was very intentional that we were on a bus. I remember hearing somebody ask the question earlier when I was in a meeting where we were talking about this experience. They said, why wouldn't it be more efficient to just fly there first? And she said, no, you have to ride on the bus all night and be tired together. So 2 of the 3 nights were spent on the bus. And really, you don't get any sleep sitting on a bus all night. So I guess your defenses are sort of worn down. You're just really authentic. You need to encounter these experiences together. And remember, it's not just the non-African American who's experiencing something new, but the African American, whether that person has gone on the trip once or 5 times, they're still having an experience too, and you're dealing with this together, and as a whole group. You do everything as a group. So it was a lot of intense learning, and simply experiencing it together without being told what you should feel or think.
One of the things that really struck me is that you really took some highlights, because from Birmingham and to Selma and to Memphis and all the places you went, there were historical incidents and events that happened there. On the trip, were you given some information to try to relive that experience, or did they share about those who lived that experience and their experiences, or how did that work?
Yes, there was a whole range of information that we received through various videos and things that we could read. There was a book list. These places that we visited provided lots of information, far more than we could ever absorb in the amount of time that we were there. So we were gaining so much information, and in a way that sticks with you more than if you just read the stories in history books, which we've all done. We heard more stories than what you get in the history books. But also just being there, as anybody might imagine, it's different than reading about it. If you can stand someplace and say, this is what happened right here, and you've seen footage or you've seen images in the museums that show you what that block looked like in the 1960s. We did walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was the site of Bloody Sunday. And of course it feels different when you're walking through today, but you could imagine what that was like. For some people it was telling them the story that was in their own past, of their grandparents or parents or even themselves. For others of us who didn't experience that, except from afar, it was seeing history in a more meaningful way. And I think it's easy for people to think that happened a long time ago, especially if you're young, and it really is history that
not even in your lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty amazing.
And some of the participants on this group were quite young. It's helpful to realize how recent that really was. I do remember that era. I was not that old, but I remember it, and I think that was just not that many years ago. We need to not forget that. In our group, people ranged from college age to in their 60s. I don't know if there's anybody older than that, but that was a really good age range. And so it was valuable for people who had remembered the movement, and also for those who were learning about it from their elders. I thought that was really rich to have that wide age range.
So people really came from many different churches and many different places to be part of this
Right.
journey?
Part of the program is you can either travel, you can participate and bring your own African American partner. And some people choose to bring somebody who they work with or as a friend. Or you can ask to be assigned one. And I asked to be assigned one. And they just pair us up, and we find out when we're sitting in the room there at the orientation or the beginning moments. That's when they announce who the partners are, and we look across the room and discover who our partner is, and then we go get into our pairs, and from then on, we're partners.
Were they from different denominations, different religious backgrounds?
Most of them were from the Covenant Church. There were a number of pastors.
Both the whites and the blacks?
Yeah, because it is a covenant program, though they're very open to anybody else joining in that. So many of them were pastors or church leaders, missionaries, church staff. They actually have a requirement that people at a certain level of their staffing have to go on this trip. So it's a requirement for their understanding of multiculturalism. But other people can go. Sometimes students at there's a Covenant University here in Chicago, and some of them are associated with that or with the seminary that's there. So there were a few Mennonites in the group. I think I was the only Brethren, and there were probably some from other churches that I was not that aware of. We actually were encouraged not to tell what we did. We just said our name so that everybody was on the same level, so to speak, just a person, so that you didn't know who was an executive and who was a student, other than if it just kind of slipped out in conversation. That was really good, because we were known by our first names.
One of the things I was really struck with is the question, how would you like to be referred to?
Yeah.
And the response to that I thought was really enlightening. Did you have any trouble deciding how you would like to be referred to?
No, I didn't, because and the question was, at the beginning, asking everybody to go around and say, how would you like to be referred to? And the intention, which we didn't understand at first, was racially, how do you want to be identified? And my observation was that African Americans knew instantly. They knew that answer. They didn't have to think about it. And for the most part, people who were not African American, who were white, let's say it that way, had not thought about that question. People of color generally have. And I'm of Korean background, so I think about it every day. And I talked with Debbie Blue, the organizer, afterwards about that, and she said that's why they asked that question.
And that's why they ask it in that way.
Yes, it helps people immediately get a sense of what the landscape is like. And the reality is that, at least in the United States, and my guess in most countries, if you are not white, you think about it all the time because it really, it's a reality all the time. And if you're white, it's what's considered normal.
But don't you think it has to do with the dominant culture, not just the white or other? For instance, if you're in Asia or Japan or whatever, you don't really think of yourself, unless you're a foreigner.
That could be,
You
right.
know, because my experience when I've been in foreign countries is, and I'm the only white person, it's very clear to me that I'm the only white person.
Yeah.
But in this culture, I don't think that way. But when I was in Africa, it was very clear to me that, you know, there's not a lot of other people like me.
Right.
And I was aware of that because I became to be sensitive. Are they treating me differently because of the way I look?
Yeah.
But I can understand.
You're right that you become very aware of your race, but virtually anywhere you would go in the world, a white person, even if that person is the only white person in the group, would still be considered the dominant culture. And that would be...
Really? I wouldn't have thought that.
Yes, I think that would be quite true, that you would be afforded privileges that you weren't even aware of. So there is a difference.
I had a different experience about
Right,
that.
right.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was your interest in seeing the annual conference declaration about more interracial sensitivity or interconnections from the 2007 annual conference, and feeling like in 5 years there really hasn't been that much movement. What is your sense about writing this article? Do you have is it being received well? Are you getting any inquiries about how can we actually do something like this in the Church of the Brethren?
Yeah, the responses I've heard have been good, and I will be speaking to the Intercultural Luncheon at annual conference about this same story. And that's a different audience than speaking to the board, which I also reported to. Yeah, I wish there were ways that we could move forward. It's not just the 2007 paper, but if you go back through history, we have a long litany of denominational statements we've made about our intentions, our good intentions. Brethren and Black Americans, one about Native Americans. There are just many, many statements that we've made. So there's no lack of desire to be more multicultural, but it's really hard to figure out how to do that. And I don't think, well, clearly we haven't figured out how to do that. I think this experience is one that could be life-changing for a number of people. And when I tell folks about it, they get excited. They feel like it's something that's different. To me, it's a new way. I guess it's not completely new. It's not new for the Covenant Church, but it's new for us to think about how we could move beyond, well, having a luncheon. I mean, how can we actually be different? How can we change the complexion of the church? And what I like about this model is that we enter each other's stories. We don't just hear them, which is really meaningful. To sit and listen to somebody's story, and more important, to be able to tell somebody else your story, is significant. But this is also about making a story together. You travel together, and you're in each other's stories. I don't think people could be exactly the same coming out of this experience. Something would have changed, even if they didn't have as good experience as I had. Still, they had something, and they They thought new thoughts. They met new people. They had a different kind of experience that I would assume would give them a new understanding of what it's like to be with people who are a little different, and now may not feel quite so different. We need to respect the stories that we each bring, and this is one way to do that. So I guess what I see being possible in the Church of the Brethren is for us to either participate in this sort of an experience or think of our own experiences that we could come up with where we really encounter each other on a deeper level than simply being in the same meeting together.
I'd like to ask you to read the poem. You put together a poem in the Messenger that was taken from some of the words in your article. And the people who can read the Messenger can see it, but it's called Racism. And I'd like you to just read it in your own words, because I thought that was very powerful.
Certainly. And this poem was created by simply erasing most of the words in the article itself, and these are the words that I left remaining. So it's a poem that comes out of the article, but unintentionally. I found it in the poem, in the article. It's titled Racism. Roughly, this is the idea I have longed to truly hear. In pairs we sat with different eyes, stories, life, a meditative place of stone and water, bloody in between, a great multitude touching the names spilling across the surface, to think every day, if not this, then another, moving the soul together.
Wendy McFadden, thank you for being with us on Brethren Voices. It's been a delight to get to talk to you in person.
Thank you.
In Elgin, Illinois, for Brethren Voices, this is Brent Carlson, wishing you peace.
The path he trod,
The path he trod,
all those who tread,
all those who tread,
the path he trod.
the path he trod,
All those who tread the path he trod shall be called the friends of God. May his peace begin with me. Oh, the Jesus way
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me.